Hey, Guorene here. This will be a romantic guide like none that has come before. Today, we are checking out Cyrene, one of the most talked about characters in all of Honkai Star Rail, who has an insane amount of varying opinions about her. For those that want to know immediately, she is strong in many teams, but she has restrictions and problems I'll be going over later on. So first, we'll discover her insanely large kit, check out those Eidolons, then discuss builds and her pool value. I will also be doing a second more in-depth video on her teams, so be sure to subscribe to catch that. And now, let's begin. Cyrene is an Ice Remembrance character and our third of this combo already. As for special stats, Cyrene has a very large base HP, a decent speed, and a unique energy cost. For leveling her up, you want to get her Memory Sprite skill maxed instantly, or you are trolling, and then level her skill for the true damage buff. After that, you can level her talent and ultimate, followed by her basics and Memo Sprite talent for a little bit more damage from her. But now it's ability time, and I hope you have something nice to eat or drink whilst we go through this chaotic kit. Cyrene's goal in combat is to maximize her Recollection points, which is what we use for her ultimate instead of energy. We want to use her ultimate as soon as possible in the fight to get access to some of the craziest buffs in the game and to improve her whole kit. So how do we get Recollection points? Well, the first time we ever get any is at the start of combat. Depending on the number of Chrysos Heirs, yes, you heard that right, or Remembrance Path characters outside of her in the team, the more recollections she begins with. The amount you get at 1, 2, and 3 Heirs, or Remembrance characters, is 2, 3, and 6 respectively. So this is our first sign of the Chrysos Heir synergy, and it will get even more synergistic later. Our heirs, if you don't know, outside of Cyrene are Tribi, Saridra, Evernight, Danhung PT, Hycelens, Hyacinth, Finan, Anaxa, Aglaya, Mydei, Castorice, Cypher, and Remembrance MC. So 13 different teammate options for this passive. But Cyrene also gains Recollection during her turns. If she uses a basic attack, we'll get 1 stack, and if we use a skill, we get much more with 3. So we'll be consuming our team's lovely skill points to start up her engine, and it'll be worth it. Cyrene also has an enhanced basic attack that will grant 3 Recollection later on, but it won't generate SP, and so she becomes SP neutral after her ultimate. But the main source of Recollection is through her talent. When combat begins or after Cyrene takes action, all allies and their memory sprites gain Future. When they take action, they'll consume Future to grant her Recollection, so it's just gone. What this means is that you'll use abilities on your heirs, consume Future, and Cyrene must take action for you to then consume Future again on their next turn, or ultimate for example. You want to weave in Cyrene actions in between your rotations to get as many Recollection points as possible. Since it says take action, you can also play around it to get points as early as you need. For example, you have a team rotation but they got their ultimates. Well, instead of ulting immediately, you can wait till Cyrene's next turn, then ult after she acts, meaning you instantly consume Future. If you ulted earlier instead, after your normal action, it wouldn't have given any Recollection points. Now, Memory Sprites work for this too, which means if I act with Aglaya and then Garment Maker, it has 2 separate stacks, which is really nice. But a bonus synergy on top is through her E2, where Memory Sprites do not consume their Future stack and get it for free when summoned. Unfortunately, joint attacks still consume Future and do not count as 2 stacks for Cyrene. Those are still based on the character's Future stack, but it means Garment Maker taking thousands of actions or resummoning Eevee and Netherwing will battery up Cyrene a ton. Those are all the ways to gain Recollection in her base kit. We build up to 24, which takes a while to unleash what we will call her first ultimate, and we can have a maximum of 27 of these points. But at 24, it's time for her first ultimate. When activating it, Cyrene summons her Memory Sprite, which is just her. She grants it an immediate extra turn and then activates all ally ultimates. This means if you use energy or not, you get your ult maxed out, and this goes for the whole team. Cyrene then enters the Ripples of Past Reverie state where she will enhance her basic attack into an AoE attack that generates 3 Recollection. Cyrene then self-buffs her and her Memory Sprite by 50% crit rate, and finally, she deploys her skill zone with no duration, so no need to refresh it. Now this first special ult can only be activated once in a battle, and it costs 12 Recollection to use, but needs 24 Recollection to be able to be used, if that makes sense. So we only use 12, which means we have 12 left, and we are going to generate more later on. So what do we do with our Recollection points then? Well, now every time we hit 12 Recollection, we can use her other ultimate, and this is a very small effect of giving her Memory Sprite an extra turn, but that is everything. Notice how she had no Memory Sprite things happening before. That's because we can't summon it until the first ultimate, and her whole magic is tied into it acting. It cannot act until we give it these extra turns because it has 0 speed and does not appear on the action order. But whether it's the first ult or the 12 Recollection mini ult just after or later on, giving it an extra turn is what lets us use its Memosprite skill. We do have a defensive Memosprite skill which makes her nuke a planet, but we won't be using this until way later in a fight or when we get free uses in certain conditions that we'll see later. Anyway, the support Memosprite skill is what's important, and it lets you select one of your 3 allies and applies a buff onto them. If the target is not a Chrysos Heir, this is a weak 40% damage buff, but what really matters is if they are a Chrysos Heir. Yes, Cyrene has a different buff for every single different Chrysos Heir in the game to 14 different special effects. If we go over to her dedicated buff screen, we can see all of these, and so it's time to look at them, I guess. Some buffs are effective the whole battle, some are one-time effects, and some are hybrids. So Mydei first has a one-time effect. When used on Mydei, it removes all CC on him. If he's in the Vendetta state, he automatically uses a Godslayer be God without consuming charge, and also gets 200% crit damage for said Godslayer. If Mydei is not in the Vendetta state, then he gets a free 100% advance. Well, the first part is useless since he's immune to CC in Vendetta, and the last bit is nice for simulated universe maybe, but also redundant for endgame. However, getting Godslayer be Gods whenever you hit 12 Recollection is just crazy. Normally it takes a lot of beating or many actions to even get one, but now we can choose exactly when to do it, and it doesn't even cost charge, which means you can get them back to back. But what it also does is let you now combine Mydei with Saridra even at E0 for back-to-back Godslayer be Gods when you align everything correctly. It's beautiful, but more on that in the team vid. Finan gets a permanent buff instead. He gets 6 Core Flames and Eternal Ignition on use. When transforming, if his stacks exceed 12, he gets 12% crit damage per excess Core Flame, up to 72% or 6 excess stacks. Eternal Ignition gives 16% crit rate and makes it so he never ends his transformation unless he dies, instead refreshing his turns when the turns end and granting him a Force Scourge as if he just transformed. He then loses HP on attack, but we heal more than that, and he deals additional damage instances too. Jeez. First off, the crit damage buff is locked to E6 Finan, as we can only get 3 extra stacks at E0, and thus only 36% crit damage. And second, he doesn't end his transformation, which means no Danhong PT ults or Saridra ults, and it also means you don't get a bonus 50% attack from his passive. For an E0 Finan, it's not fantastic, but it at least solves the problem of never having to ult again for people that hate that. Castorice also gets a permanent buff. When used on her now, her new bud can overflow up to 200%. When summoning Netherwing, this overflow new bud will be consumed to increase the damage multiplier of the big detonation attack, and if there are 2 or fewer enemy targets, an even bigger increase. This is such a massive boon to quality of life and single target performance, which as we know is what she wants help with. Being able to use new bud overflowing means no more happy accidents with overcapped charge from higher sin abilities, and it means you don't feel forced to use her ult when you don't want to, which gives you so much agency in fights. Amazing buff to Castorice. Anaxa has a one-time effect. When used on him, 1 SP will be recovered, and Anaxa takes action immediately. He'll get 3 extra skill damage instances for 1 turn, and gives 60% attack and 40% skill damage to all Erudition characters until the start of his next turn, when scaling or using a basic attack. Not only does it help with SP, it helps his sub DPS role, but more importantly, it is amazing for his main DPS role too. More multipliers, more self buffs, more actions, insane effect. Combine it with Saridra's coup de main, and you have an insane combo just like Mydei. Now, our first support Cypher gets a permanent buff when used on her. She gets a 36% damage increase, and now decreases the defense of the patron by 20%, and decreases all other enemies' defense by 12%. It's free amp, stacks decently with her signature, and since we can double ult at 24 stacks, this means you can ult on your carry, and then her anyway for a bunch of def reduction. But the damage percent is weak, and I'd prefer saving Cyrene ult in some cases, like for Anaxa or Mydei, because their effects are repeatable and super strong. And Aglaia gets a one-time effect. When used on her, she will gain the Romantic effect and immediately stack up Garment Maker to 6 out of 6. If Aglaia or Garment Maker attack, Romantic will be consumed and generate 70 energy. Aglaia and Garment Maker also get 72% damage and 36% Def Ignore, lasting until they exit Supreme Stance. So the one-time effect, if you can permanently stay in Supreme Stance, is in fact just the energy. Otherwise, she keeps those massive damage buffs even without reapplication of Cyrene's ultimate. Hyacinth now as our first sustain heir, and she gets a hybrid effect. When we use Cyrene's memo skill, Hyacinth will just get 2 stacks of Ota Sky even without touching her. But if you use on her, she gets 24 energy. The Ota Sky buff improves Little Ika's tally power and gets consumed after Hyacinth skills or ults. Basically, you don't even have to use it on her and she does more stuff, and using it on her grants a small amount of energy. However, remember you don't have to use your Memo Sprite skill to support, Cyrene can attack with it too, and there are other characters that get better benefits, not a crazy buff. Kirby then gets a permanent buff. When used on her, she ignores 12% defense and deals more instances of additional damage. It's a very small buff for a very small heir. On the opposite side of buff power, we have Eidolons though, who gets a hybrid buff. When used on her, she gains Flowing Warmth, which is consumed after she attacks to regenerate 60 energy. Permanently though, with the Cyrene buff, you get a 120% damage bonus for Eidolons, and you turn her into a dot detonator. The damage bonus is already crazy, the dot detonation is insane, especially since it works on skills too, and the extra energy makes her spam ults out of the wazoo. It's a really good buff, but it's to compensate for weaker Recollection generation. So Ridra's buff is a permanent effect that first gives 30% crit damage to the military merit ally. Then after coup de main ends, she gets 1 point of charge for free every time. We love extra skills, and now we can get them with 1 less skill usage, which is a nice bonus. Again, it's not always going to be the top priority like with some other support ones, but it can really ramp up power during a long fight. Dan Hung PT is like Hyacinth, where he gets Ota Earth when we use his Memo Sprite skill, even if we don't target him, which first gives the bondmate a 24% damage buff. What then happens is his next 3 enhanced Soul Dragon attacks deal bondmate based damage scaling on his shield effect, which is just a fancy new way of dealing more damage. Now if we use it on him, we gain additional bonuses, where Soul Dragon gets a 100% action advance instantly, and it will be enhanced without consuming the enhanced charge stacks. It's very cool if you don't need Recollection for anything else, and can be used to wheelchair weaker multiply DPS, which is fun. Evernight then has a permanent buff when used on her. 18% damage for her Dream Dissolving skill, more Memoria on skills and ults, and her crit damage buff is increased by another 12% of her own crit damage. A bit more damage, more Memoria, so more damage, and more crit damage, so more damage. It's a nice buff, especially in the Exodia team where everyone contributes a ton to the fight. Now, RMC of course has to get one too, and theirs is a permanent effect when used on them. You get an attack buff based on Cyrene's Memo Sprite's max HP, which is basically hers, a crit rate buff based on the sprite's crit rate, and then finally you get free Minuet of Blooms from Cyrene every time RMC uses their enhanced basic attack. We get their enhanced basic attack after they ult, and so this means every ult we now also get an extra Minuet of Blooms, which is Cyrene's offensive Memo Sprite skill. So RMC can become a DPS and do a ton of damage even on a supportive build. It's very fun. And finally, Cyrene's own buff. After she has gained Recollection from each different teammate, she will deal additional damage during her Minuet of Bloom's Memo Sprite skill to a random enemy. She also gets a new effect. After ulting or summoning her Memo Sprite, she gains 1 point of story, and at 3, she consumes all of them to give her Memo Sprite an extra turn and automatically use the Minuet of Bloom's ability. Now, she gets this buff for free since she can't target herself, and it gives extra multipliers and free attack uses. You get 1 after your first back-to-back ult, since you get 1 from summon, 1 from the first ult, and 1 from the second tier ult. But then it takes a while for another one. Okay, it's over, right? I'm free? You can see that her kit is all about getting to 24 Recollection, double Memo Sprite skilling allies for massive buffs, and then building up to occasional 12 Recollection ults that can either let you attack for some damage, or buff Chrysos Heirs up again if they have any repeatable effects. Every heir will play differently with Cyrene. And even if the buffs may be crazy, that doesn't mean she's an instant best in slot support. For example, Eidolons is big, but it takes a while to ramp up to 24 stacks. Mydei is amazing, but you need to consistently generate those 12 stacks for every subsequent Godslayer. We'll talk about that in the pool value section, but more in the team video too. The last thing on her kit outside of Eidolons that I'll note are her buffs. Her skill gives 24% true damage to the whole team, which is up permanently after she uses her first ultimate. She gives all allies 20% damage in her talent permanently, and an additional 20% if she hits 180 speed. If she uses her Memo Sprite skill on a non-Chrysos Heir, they get 40% extra damage, but that's terrible, and we know that after 2 hours of talking that she has special buffs for each Chrysos Heir. She self-buffs by 24% max HP, 50% crit rate, and she gains 2% ice res pen for every speed point past 180, up to 120% res pen or 240 speed. In trace bonuses, she finally has 37.3% crit damage, 9 speed, and 10% HP. Now, let's leave this section behind by finishing with her Eidolons. E1 makes that special memory sprite skill you specifically trigger after 3 story now grant 6 recollection points. Essentially, you can now double ult and instantly generate a free 6 for another ult real soon. That means every subsequent set of 3 ults you get half of one back. It doesn't help her generation before her ramp up though. It also increases the number of bounces of this special attack by 12, which is absolutely insane for a DPS team, and big damage in a memo team, but otherwise is just nice. E2 is the controversial one though, with 12 recollection points for free when entering combat. You also get a bonus to the skill's true damage buff up to a bonus 24%. Now, the true damage buff is awesome, but going to E2 for just that isn't worth it. The 12 recollection, however, has people wanting. So, why is it good, and maybe why would it not be good? It's good for an instant ramp up bonus and lets your mega buffs start going crazy much earlier in a fight. This is really helpful for 0 cycle clears, but most don't care about that at all. It's good if you don't have full Chrysos Heir teams, for example running Mydei, Sunday, and a Gallagher with your Cyrene. But if you did invest into the lovely heirs this year, Mydei, RMC, or Synergizes and Hyacinth does not need the E2 here. Furthermore, if you are lacking units that can build her stacks, then getting her ult faster with E2 is good, but this wouldn't solve the problem of future recollection stacking. And it's good if you don't want to use a Chrysos Heir DPS at all. For example, you want to use Fei Xiao with her. Well, now you could run E2 Cyrene, Danheng PT, Cypher with her, and still buff Fei Xiao quite powerfully thanks to the 48% true damage and 80% normal damage buff, as well as the buffs that the other heirs get that further boost the carry. For example, more Dan Dragons, which means more bondmate based damage, and extra death reduction from Cypher. But it's likely that better supports come out anyway, but other teammate slots too, and what happens when they replace the heirs she's synergizing with? So be wise with your pulls. I don't think it's that worth considering she's locked to Chrysos Heirs, and it's likely there would be better buffers for non-heir DPS in the future anyway, even if you had her E2. Her kit is undeniably super strong for heir teams at E2, but are you going to use them forever? Anyways, next in the Eidolons, E4 Cyrene just blows up her damage potential even higher with a stackable multiply increase, even if it is slow to ramp up. And E6 steals Robin's gimmick with a 100% action advance to the team on the first 24 recollection ult. Then her special minuet of Bloom's attack that you activate after 3 story stacks now gets even more effects, like permanent death reduction and Dance 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 built in. Lots of fun. But that is her kit all done, so what are my thoughts on her? I think her Memory Sprite skill has an awesome gimmick of unique buffs per heir, but because they're unique and designed around each kit that all have different power levels, it's not always going to be balanced perfectly. The Chrysos Heir gimmick means that she has a place at E0 S0 in every Chrysos Heir team to varying degrees of potency. In a Castorice team, she is amazing at base, but in a Finan team, it's not fantastic. But I think having a support that can work in all these teams is really interesting because, for example, Sunday works with Aglaya, Mydei, Anaxa, Finan, but can't work with Castorice or Evernight nearly as well. Kribby works with Mydei, Castorice, Evernight, E1, Aglaya, but Anaxa and Finan don't use her until maybe her E1, and Dot don't either. Same with Robin, who isn't used everywhere, and same with Synergizes. Cyrene, however, works with every single one of them, as an upgrade, side grade, or downgrade depending on the team and main DPS. But this gimmick also restricts her. She needs heirs to stack up her ult, and she needs them so she can give out those good buffs. Because in the future, you might be able to stack her up with Remembrance characters that release post-Amphorius, but she wouldn't give them special buffs like she gives to the heirs. That might be fine if you have a super strong repeatable buff like Anaxa's or Mydei's, I guess, but outside of those, you'd have to use her Memory Sprite skill for just some damage. I think though she is designed to be a way a bunch of heirs can still carry on through power creep. 2.x DPS with investment still clear to this day, and 3.x DPS will likely do the same in 4.x with high optimization or a bit of vertical investment. Cyrene will be an investment you can make to help that happen as well. She also would keep fellow heirs relevant too, like supportive ones like Cypher even if they get weaker over time, and she'd let your new strong universal supports go on your other teams. So, one problem is that restriction to heirs. It hurts her future potential since we are very unlikely to get any heirs at all anymore. The other part of this restriction though is you're building a team around her and the DPS at the same time now. Anaxa can run Sunday, Robin, Danhung, PT as a normal team, but if you want to use Cyrene, you might need to bring RMC instead over Sunday. Mydei can run Sunday, Tribby, Gallagher, but here we would need Hyacinth instead of Gallagher, or we're cooked for Cyrene charging. If you do get E2 Cyrene, it fixes this, and E2 Cyrene is 2 more unit pulls, which I guess counts as the heirs you'd pull here in the first place. But I don't know, pulling Synergizes and Hyacinth sounds cool over E2 Cyrene for only the heir teams. And the second problem is that ult charging, kind of. Making it based around the heirs is cool, and making it the way it works means there is some nuance to how you play with it. But giving unconsumable stacks to member sprites is just weird, when we could just remove that restriction and make everyone a bit better equally. So, the charging takes a while, but the charging also isn't that bad unless you're lacking a ton of heirs. And then the real problem is for 0 cycles, but most people do not care for those, and basing her strength around 0 cycling is not a great metric. That's because she's designed to be a ramp up unit, and once she ramps up she gets insane. It's a trade-off. She trades away a weak wave 1 in MOC or early PF waves or the start of the AS mechanic for a crazy rest of the fight. Cypher did the same, and we saw how versatile she can be because of it. And yes, that can hurt since every game mode is based on AV, but at the same time, the rest of the fight is going to be very strong. A final problem though is the RMC factor. They are one of our only free heirs and also synergize amazingly with Cyrene, especially if running sustainless teams. RMC can even ramp up Cyrene faster by advancing her early on. But we are near 4.x, and judging on how powerful RMC is, and HMC was for the break meta, I wouldn't be surprised if the next MC is crazy too. So is all that worth it? And for who is she worth at E0? Well, that's the thing. She needs heirs to be worth it, so depending on how many units you pull this year, you have more or less of a reason to pull. We have a free Dan, we have a free RMC, but the rest are all pulls you had to have made. So let's go through the heirs, and we'll give an example Cyrene team for each of them, and dive into it more in the next video. Aglaia gets a decent upgrade from E0 Cyrene, replacing the Robin slot, but I don't know if you should go for it if you're using E1 Robin already. You still want Sunday in my opinion at E0 Aglaia because she takes a while to ramp up, and Dan or Hyacinth is needed if using a sustain. Aglaia can ramp up Cyrene decently thanks to Garment Maker's action spam, but 70 energy every subsequent ult is still only a fifth of her total ult cost. And at E1 Aglaia the big energy buff Cyrene gives is even less impactful. Mydei though gets a big upgrade. Godslayers on ults is just an amazing thing to have without any charge consumed. It frontloads his damage a lot. It also lets him run Synergizes as a viable synergy even at E0 Mydei, as you can now time Godslayers back to back with ease. Even without Synergizes though, the buffs she gives are awesome. The problem though is he is not a Dan user, so you need to run RMC Sustainless or Hyacinth, who is not a fantastic synergy for him on her release. Mydei users are unlikely to have her, and so that's another pull if going for a sustained team. Anaxa gets a big upgrade from Cyrene. More turns and exactly when you want them if you have Cyrene ult, then SP, big buffs, more multipliers. You can see what this advance can do in Apocalyptic Shadow, where we can break before the boss even moves. But he will want Dan for sure in this team, RMC if sustainless, and Synergizes is a fantastic heir to slot in here. Finance upgrade isn't it though. He has anti-synergy with some of the buffs, like needing E6 for the max crit damage buff, or wanting to ult again for 50% attack, or Synergizes ults, or Dan ults. You lose the only agency he had left for an infinite ult, which is comfy, but I think I prefer seeing my teammates every now and then. She does let you run Sustainers with ease outside of fights that force one at least. Iceland's upgrade is big, but she needs Kafka even so because Iceland's detonating is cool and all, but that doesn't mean Kafka's insane detonation frequency isn't still insane. That's one Chrysos Heir down. So whilst the buff is big, the ramping is slow. You could replace Kafka for RMC, but it won't always achieve a similar result. At least if you don't have Kafka, you now have a new alternative support, but I don't think it's a necessary pull. Castorice gets one of the best upgrades, as she not only gets an amazing buff, but she also is a remembrance character for that bonus recollection stacking. The Exodia team is complete and works disgustingly well together. The Overflow New Bud is an incalculable bonus to quality of life, she gets single target help, and with Evernight and Hyacinth being insane teammates for her already, already buffing the whole team is just a perfect fit. She can also run Tribby or RMC if lacking Evernight, which are 2 heirs, so you don't even lose out. Evernight on that same note gets a big upgrade for either sub DPS or main DPS teams. The extra crit damage buff to the whole team just works so well since Hyacinth does damage, Evernight does damage, RMC does damage, and Cyrene does damage. It's a quad DPS team and Evernight buffs all of them by an insane amount. But she also has that bonus synergy where she spams out EV summons, which means easy recollection stacking. But as you can see, the HP scalers will need Hyacinth even more so now, even Mydei unless Sustainless, which is very strong. The attack scalers can work with Sustainless RMC at least, and have Danhong PT for free who works amazingly, but the teams might need to forego other supports for better Cyrene ramp up, for example swapping out a Sunday. Outside of Chrysos Heirs teams, I wouldn't pull for her, for example to buff Archer or Saber. The Herta is the only one that works thanks to the Anaxa Cyrene buff that also boosts Erudition members, but you need Anaxa for that, and you'd also need to run Dan or Hyacinth in her team for Recollection charging. Even then I wouldn't pull her and would just stick with Tribi on this team. Anyways, to finish the video, let's talk about her builds. She has a few options for Relics and Planars. The most universal setup is literally going 2p speed, which I recommend for most Cyrene users. She needs to act as much as possible to battery herself and also to refresh the team's future stacks. She also needs to hit 180 speed for bonus damage buff to the team, and then she gets damage benefits with res pen for excess speed past 180. Furthermore, getting to 200 speed with this extra 12% speed is a viable way to alleviate ramp-up issues in teams like Finance, where she'll get 3 actions in the first cycle and 2 every following cycle. Very strong. If you run Evernight or Castorice compositions and don't need the speed, World Remaking Deliverer will boost her damage and the whole team's damage on top. It's super diluted though and harder to farm than a simple 2p speed combo, and I think I still prefer the 2p speed combos. Technically, the Eagle set is a final option since the mini ults still count as an ult and will advance her forward. For Planars though, you can go the buffing route and use the new Amphoris Planar, but her Memory Sprite takes forever to come up since it needs the first ult, so you don't get the speed for a while, and the speed has to do something to actually be worth it. If you want to hit 200 speed for wave 2, this buff definitely helps, but it also could just be equipped on RMC. But the set I'd recommend is Vonwacq. Her gameplay problem is her initial ramp up, and at 180 speed with Vonwacq you take 3 actions in the first cycle, which means you don't need to hit 200 speed anymore for that, though 200 speed is still really good. 3 actions is 9 recollection, you can start with 6, and so you would only need 9 recollection for the 0 cycle ult if with a full air team. You can get this by saving your team's ult until she acts on her 3rd turn, or you advance her, or you have Memory Sprites, or you just wait until the next cycle. Either way, being able to help her ramp up without needing a ton of speed is great. Main stats will be crit damage or HP chest, speed boots all day every day, HP or ice orb, and then HP rope. Crit damage chest would give damage, but HP chest keeps her healthy in Sustainless and still helps in Castorice teams. The orb is interchangeable for the same reasons. I'd recommend HP orb though, because farming an ice damage orb with speed sounds like hell. For stat goals, your first goal before anything is to achieve 180 speed. 200 speed is then another really strong goal but hard to hit, and 240 is the cap for speed, but don't go for this outside of something like E2 Cyrene. Then everything else is damage or HP stacking. You can aim for 50% crit rate to max it out with her ult, and something like 4000 all the way to 6000 HP dependent on main stats. Finally, it's Lycone time. A nice change is that Cyrene's Lycone is not needed at all. No hidden mechanics, no giant damage differences, it's just a luxury pull with some pretty art. You'll get 18% speed for the wearer, and then a 10% vulnerability debuff to enemies and 16% crit damage buff to allies, which gets increased after using both an offensive and defensive Memory Sprite skill in the battle. So it's not up instantly, and the effects are nice but not crazy. Though the only replacement in the game for her is the Herta Shop Lycone because of the speed buff, that or the Hyacinth Lycone. Anyway, Memory Curtain is free and powerful for Cyrene, but that means whoever's using it right now needs to give it to Cyrene. If it's RMC, well, they got a really good free-to-play code in this patch anyway. And yeah, the team video is coming soon where I'll be talking about the heirs in depth, their pros and cons on each buff she gives, and more. Let me know what you think of her though, and if you're pulling, and thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my awesome YouTube members, and have a Guoba day.